live here and people that are trying to work and to manage these systems and keep the forest green and get more fish back in these rivers, we need to figure out how to work with fire. And so we're not spending, what are we up to? Just under $60 million. So talk about sustainable, that is not sustainable. When that money could be invested into proactive fuels reduction and fire retreat.
So then they show up and they run the pump a little bit, and they run the sprinklers. Meanwhile, you can see it getting closer and closer down. Becomes, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock. Everybody starts getting ready to leave again. And it's like, where the hell are you guys going?
They had to drive to Idlewild.
Right?
No, I don't know, but it was the 17th or 18th of July. So then it really starts cooking in back of Suzanne's house, and these 2 helicopter pilots show up. Man, I wish I knew who they were, because to me, they say Suzanne's place, and maybe it would have jumped the road in that, because it was really cooking. And before dark, they were there for at least an hour. You know, trading places, just a shuttle going back, dumping on it. While they're dumping on the fire, everybody leaves again. And I go talk to the water tender, and I said, what are you doing? And he actually said to me, I'd like to stay, man, but I got my orders. And they all pull out. Nobody shows up that night until midnight.
We're moving fire camp that day, and you know the pattern was at 9 o'clock in the morning, you wake up, you find crews in your yard. They say, hey, we're going to kind of look at everything. We're going to check the water, make sure everything's working. We're going to run your pump for an hour or 2, and then we're going to move on. Totally makes sense, except that then there's nobody at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the winds came up. And that happened when the fire jumped. There was nobody in our neighborhood. Everybody was moving camp that day when the fire jumped.
Yeah.
And we watched as trailers left Brazil Field. When the fire jumped, that's when people were like, oh shoot, we probably really got to get going up to Idlewild. And I can only imagine what the road looked like as fire crews were trying to come back down from Idlewild for the fire. And there was hours that we didn't have water tanks, water trucks filling water, and trees were crowning in neighbors' yards. And so that's just to kind of demonstrate how we didn't really feel like we had structured protection. Then as the fire came down 2 different days, there was nobody posted in our yards at night as the fire was burning on both sides of the river. When you took charge, I drove through the Know Nothing neighborhood, and there were fire trucks posted at every single residence. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And so I wanted to thank you for that and just let you know that I appreciate that. And also as a reflection for Incident 1, I think using an infinite water source is a good thing to do. And not coming up with a plan you can't follow through with, like having water trucks deliver water to the residences. They just weren't there when it was a moment that we needed them the most. And also just in the future, thinking about our roads and the moving a camp so far away actually is putting all of your crews at risk to make everybody drive the roads. And even with the one-way traffic, you know, I was like, okay, this is the end of the convoy, and you can lead the convoy back up. It's one-way traffic. And it seemed like whoever was on the upper end just stopped, like, managing the road, because here I was supposed to be in the front of the convoy heading upriver, and boy, we met so much traffic down. So it's really not a surprise that the roads were congested, and I just think that that is a really big fire safety concern.
I was just going to say that I don't think the issue with structure protection had to do with the resources. I think it had to do with communication and kind of strategy for how resources were deployed. I think by the time the fire jumped the river here in Forks, the resources were here, the personnel were here. But my second comment that I didn't make earlier was about communication and kind of public relations on this fire. It was definitely started off bad and it didn't improve that much. You know, as a community, I don't feel like I've ever seen a fire where public relations with the community were worse than this fire. And we definitely heard from many firefighters who were coming through that they also felt like, I think one firefighter crew said, I've never been on a fire that was a bigger shit show. Like literally, that's what he said.
Yeah, I heard that from
from-
a number as well.
When team one was here.
I think that there was something that was going on. Partly it was the decision to move fire camp in the middle, and like Team One literally spent almost their whole time here moving camp. Like they started it at Bottom, and then they moved it to Forks, and they so it's like maybe they just never got their act together to actually like, you know, to do a better job because they were focusing everything on moving camp. But I feel like the resources were here. It was communication was bad at all levels, like from the fact that like as a landowner, every single day a different crew would show up at our property. There was no continuity.
Same.
Every day you'd have to tell a new crew what was needed, where stuff was, where the pump needed to be, or once it was in, where the pump was, like where your sprinkler lay was. Like as a landowner, it was kind of crazy. Like sometimes it was multiple crews a day would show up. Oh, we're here to, you know, help. It's like, okay, you give her, you know, you run through. Like the last time at the Butler Fire burning Forks Salmon, we had like one crew that was like with us for 2 weeks, and like every day they were the crew that was like making the plan and doing the strategy. Sure, they'd go off and do other things, but like there was consistency, and they were the ones that were like, you know, telling other crews that came in, you know, like, oh, the hand crew, you need to go do this or whatever. So anyway, that was just completely lacking on this fire. And then also, you know, level up, community meetings, complete breakdown in like positive communication with community. In most fires, we have community meetings every 2, 3, 4 days. This fire, we had one in-person meeting before today. We're what, like, how many days in? I don't know, a lot, and one Zoom meeting. I'm pretty sure everyone mocked the statement that that we haven't had fires this close to communities in a while. But I do think what's true is that we haven't had a fire in a long time that's actually burned onto as many individual private properties as this one. So a lot of people were like directly impacted by fire on their property. And if all of that happened and literally got one community meeting was just kind of crazy. Like from a communications
Without an
perspective.
operation plan,
Yeah.
breakdown. I mean,
The communications were terrible on this fire. So that's just and there's at multiple levels, but like, I don't know what went wrong. But learning for the future, it was not like it's ever been in the past.
And one thing, scheduling a meeting in the center of the fire in Sawyer's Bar. You know, I was appalled that there was going to be a community meeting held in Sawyer's Bar last night at 7:30. I think, were all of you going to come to Cecilville? And Forks of Salmon and Butler Flat to a meeting in Sawyer's Bar that we would all have to drive to and deal with the traffic situation? Whoever, see, that was the kind of planning that Lyra's talking about. There was no communication. I know that Karuna made an attempt to talk to people about changing that meeting so it would be held locally. And fortunately, we have a big turnout here because it is a local meeting, and it's kind of in the center. And still, people had to drive. Certainly, people had to drive from Sawyer's Bar to Forks. They had to drive from Butler to Forks. They had to drive from Cecilville to Forks. They had to drive from Orleans to Forks. All interested people. So this is the kind of communication we're talking about. This is just one tiny little thing.
Yeah, I understand that. We did a virtual community meeting since we got in because of just where the fire was sitting. We didn't want to risk trying to go in with our joint operations. The reason for initially was Sword Bar that we wanted to do a meeting 2 days after that here. We were trying to stage it to get as much information, and then we heard specifically, and it wasn't yesterday, we actually had planned it here for a few days. And that was based on the direction from the agency administrator. So we're here to please what the community wants, and our agency administrators know we need it there. So that's why we moved it here, and it was the right decision.
Was right. So I don't think anyone would have followed you having a meeting in Sawyer's Bar.
Oh,
If
no.
you had meetings here.
Yeah, we wanted to do that. That was our whole plan.
Obviously,
And I
now,
wanted it
since
more
that big
frequent.
cliff fire
Yeah.
started, the people in Sawyer would probably be
Yeah.
loving to have a meeting, but this community.
And we wanted it more
so-
frequent. The other thing we did is we felt it was important with the community liaisons, they have their own call and own meeting. There's a lot that goes on with the cooperators, so we established every day with Karuna and the other Will and the other community liaisons, every day at 1300, we would have a meeting with them separate just to hear the concerns. We had to get it away from the cooperators because those are folks that are impacted, and we need to hear from the liaison about the people that are impacted. So we, even though we did that, we established a second one so we could hear just from the community.
Hi. Yeah, to kind of go back to that communication, Mira, I agree. And one of the things that I talked to Corinna about and Tina about is, you know, kind of talking as liaisons and the program of when we get surges of impacts with so many resources going each way, and then we get, you know, this lightning activity for almost every other day, and then we were having spotting over our main roads. Like, what does that really mean? I felt pretty flat-footed in that, to be honest. I own some of that because usually I'm able to create this cadence in some ways. And so there's going to be pre-planning moving forward because, Will, you're right. We are going to have fire on this landscape. We need to plan for both. And what does that kind of look like moving forward? And so I have been talking to some of the community members that have been providing these services for quite some time, I being one of them, and I'm going to have a better package moving forward because even where I was struggling because we had folks in the evacuation zone, we had folks outside of evacuation, we had surge of resources. And I'm not talking about the locals. We had firefighters trying to come in, do their jobs, beef up the cadence, right? You were talking about getting them closer to, you know, switching them out for shifts. That created an impact that I was not really able to pivot on quickly enough. And so I do own some of that. And we will have some better messaging in the future and some better plans that we'll share out with the communities because, again, this is where you all live and I want some input on that. So I do apologize for that as well. So.
Do you mind if I also address, I thought an individual right there, you made a very great comment about fire back on the landscape and how we do that. And I can tell you, it's a lot harder now today to do it than we used to do when I did it. I used to do 3,000, 5,000 acre burns all year long until we got into fire season. And a couple things happened. The funding went away. The environmental side, what it takes from the federal agencies to get through the NEPA process, they streamlined some of that, but then the funding to execute it isn't sustainable. And it's pretty frustrating. It was frustrating for me because one year I've got money to do it, next year you don't get anything, and we're dealing with the communities and finding was the liability. I was probably one of the last remaining burn costs, and I carried an individual $5 million policy because if we lose one structure due to a prescribed fire, and I've been there where I had a prescribed fire named after me, so I know what that's like. So I commend you for saying that because it's one of our challenges. I'm kind of a thorn since I'm retired from federal service and been with the city fire department now for 13 years. Because I write white papers all the time about dealing with the landscape. So, and this forest has really taken a look at their field projects, what they have, and they actually have done a really good job. But we look at the old fire scars, I tell you, that's the first thing I want. We want a layer of existing fire. We had the red salmon initially. You know, we've seen what that can do. We've been on the other fire scars here, and you're absolutely right. We need that to help us because you'll see that a lot of these fires slow down because they have the fire scars.
And Chris Christopherson, Forest Supervisor, and yeah, this is a fire-adapted landscape. It's been shaped by tens and thousands of years of frequent fire. And we as a community, people that live here, and people that are trying to work and to manage these systems and keep the forest green and get more fish back in these rivers, we need to figure out how to work with fire. And so we're not spending, what are we up to? Just under $60 million. So talk about sustainable, that is not sustainable. When that money could be invested into proactive fuels reduction and fire return. So one of the things we're doing on the Klamath is we have a forest-wide fire and fuels analysis that we are hopeful that we're going to be able to, in a more meaningful way, pre-treat fuels and then get fire back on the landscape in a meaningful way. And so not the 40-acre blocks, not the 400-acre blocks, but the 4,000-acre blocks that we need. And in utilizing the strategic suppression lines, whether it's hand line or Dozier line that we are intentionally keeping open because they are strategic holding and management features, and so we're looking at it. And so, Will, you're spot on. We need more fire, and that is one of the reasons why I raised my hand and come to Klamath, because it's dynamic, it's a biodiversity hotspot, it sees a lot of fire, and I want to be part of a positive change. Growing up in Oregon, I saw Paradise burn up. I started on the Plumas and worked on the Feather River, Middle Fork of the Feather River, and saw big chunks of the forest where I grew up burn up in the North Fire. So I've seen what it can do and what it will do if we can't figure it out. So I appreciate the voices being put in the room. And that's why Natalie and I are here, is two of your local line officers to hear, to listen, so we can avoid what we've seen in other parts of the country.
I thank both you and Natalie for being here. It means a lot to the community to have you two be present during the fire.
He called me between the breaks. I'd like for him to have the opportunity to ask his question.
Yeah, I didn't evacuate, and I live on the North Fork, and I think this was the 17th or 18th of July. And I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning, this incredible 20-man crew comes down and preps my place like I've never seen. And I've been up here for 30 years, and this is the third one that got really close. They put 4-foot scratch lines around every vehicle, every structure, and I got a lot of structures around my powerhouse, my bulldozer, everything was just fantastically done. Over 3,000 feet of hose, sprinklers all over. So the next day they come and they put a pump in, and meanwhile the fire's right up on the ridge, starting to back down toward the house and into Pollock Gulch. So it comes, I don't know, 6, 7 o'clock at night, and everybody leaves. Sheriff shows up a couple hours later, says, "Oh, you got to evacuate." I said, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm smart enough to know when to pull the pin." I run down the river, I got a safe zone, got it all figured out. So that night, so there's Suzanne's place, there's the Harley's place, and my place below. Nobody showed up the whole night. I was out there because I have my own little system that I pump out of the river, and I turn a valve on my water wheel, and it converts it to my little thing, and I have hose lays around my house, and all night I'm just wetting everything down my place. So by the next morning, I go up on the road because I start hearing, so nobody shows up until noon. And meanwhile, the fire's in the gulch about 200 yards up, and it's cooking pretty good.
Burning up our water system.
What?
That was when it burned up our water system.
No, that was that night is when that happened. But anyway, so I go up there the next day and I try to figure out what the hell's going on. They show up at noon. I go back down and I'm freaked out, and so I'm just spraying my place down with my own little system. But I can't protect all the rest of the place because there's no crew members down there with me. So then they show up and they run the pump a little bit, and they run the sprinklers. Meanwhile, you can see it getting closer and closer down. Becomes, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock. Everybody starts getting ready to leave again. And it's like, where the hell are you guys
They had to
going?
drive to Idlewild.
Right?
No, I don't know, but it was the 17th or 18th of July. So then it really starts cooking in back of Suzanne's house, and these 2 helicopter pilots show up. Man, I wish I knew who they were, because to me, they say Suzanne's place, and maybe it would have jumped the road in that, because it was really cooking. And before dark, they were there for at least an hour. You know, trading places, just a shuttle going back, dumping on it. While they're dumping on the fire, everybody leaves again. And I go talk to the water tender, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he actually said to me, "I'd like to stay, man, but I got my orders." And they all pull out. Nobody shows up that night until midnight. Meanwhile, by the grace of God, the winds were blowing it, because otherwise Suzanne probably lost her house. And so it's like, who takes and sets up a perimeter to guard against the enemy coming toward you, and then you abandon the positions before you take the relief guys to take up the position? And so nobody ever showed up. When my property was in the most danger, nobody ever showed up at night. And then if they did, you know, I have to show them where the pumps, I finally hauled the pump down there, put it in the river next to your guys' system, so that at least I could go down there, change the hoses, start my pump up, and make your sprinklers work. But there's nobody for all the hose lines. And like who's ever running the show, that's the commander of this, really, in my opinion, dropped the ball, because you're supposed to replace the crew before you pull the other crew out. I mean, it just makes sense to me. So it's like, you know, I remember when I first moved into this community, hanging at the beer tree, everybody was going, hey Greg, man, if there's ever a forest fire, don't leave because your place will burn. Well, I could see how that could happen now.
It was after the cat moved, and it was for several days in a row. There was a 4-hour gap between when the day shift left and when the night shift came because of the traffic control coming down.
Yeah, but for one night, for one whole night,
Yeah.
nobody showed up. And it's like,
And the pumpkins at our house took 45 minutes to empty and an hour before, this was when it was happening, to get refilled. So there's a lot of gap there, with no water except our own supply, which we had in the river, and it was a good supply until the pump broke down. And then I came to you and the other guys, Jerry and the third guy, I don't remember his name, and begged for 4 different times, 4 different days. Come on, fire's both sides, can you use one of your pumps? Got turned away until the 5th time. And then I felt a lot better.
Well, that also speaks to the fact of relying on these pumpkins and not relying on a water source, because we definitely dealt with that at Godfrey Ranch, but Sarah lives right on the river.
Right.
So when the system is set up in the first place, why aren't we using the river? Why are we using these pumpkins and depending on water trucks? So I dealt with a similar situation at Godfrey, which was, luckily the fire didn't make it there, but it was equally as crazy because our home burned in